From the Mecca of Mormonism, this is Heart of the Matter, the short show. I'm your host, Shawn McCraney. We're calling this show Battery Life. Most of us are aware of the concept of battery life, that like the Energizer rabbit, they have that rabbit keeps going and going and going, emphasizing the fact that Energizer batteries just go. We have batteries that are called Everlast. Why? Because we want a battery that has a long ability to power the thing in question. I've spent no small amount of time, especially in my early years, trying to figure out what really matters in the human existence. And to me, that's synonymous with saying what lasts. What lasts is what matters. And therefore, we ought to be involved in the priorities of things that are long living. I think that I assess things this way due to an early exposure to French and German authors and Hermann Hesse and existentialist literature and novels and that speak to the human condition. Dostoevsky and perspectives and Camus and Victor Hugo and Sartre, Nietzsche and Rand. And also by coming later in life to admire a people who were devoted to the things of bringing forth the Messiah, the nation of Israel, and learning about them and what they focused on. So we are all constantly in the process of making decisions and choices in our lives on what we will focus on, what we will spend our time doing, how we prioritize our lives, and what satiates us as human beings, things that we deem relevant and that are participatory and contributing citizens of this world. And we are made often, come out of the womb and have specific traits and characteristics that contribute to what we do. Some of us wind up being all about pleasure, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Some find themselves interested in doing harm, destruction of others and destroying property, preying on the weak and the unsuspecting, living for self, committing crimes. Many people live for their family. Their wife or husband or their children or grandchildren, others for their occupation. Many people live for the work that they do, for the golden age of retirement, the nest egg, and they look to material acquisitions as what life is all about. Artists typically put a lot of time and effort into the art they create, curating a collection of films and music and poetry and the like, while others devote themselves to other things that they are interested in, politics and community, theater, food. For most of us, we appreciate the attention we get from others for the things we choose to do. We like the response that we get from people when we tell them, this is what I spend my time doing. It's often these results that please us the most. How the world around us responds to the way we spend our time. So we often find ourselves striving to do well and to accomplish and to establish ourselves, to rise above the riff and the raff and offer something substantive that represents our time here on earth. And there are a number of facets to this. It's not just singular at all, right? So parents are generally pretty pleased when their children turn out what we call well. You know, that parents, when you become a parent, your shift typically goes from being on self to being about this product that came from you and what they are going to do with their lives. Artists are pleased with the art that comes from them. Chefs are pleased when their food is recognized and seen as good. And the examples, of course, go on and on and on. And so I want to speak on what we call the battery life of these things instead of the batteries themselves. Like the battery life, the impression life. It's how long do the things we do continue to impress? And what I mean by that is imprint upon people something substantive. is the thing that you're involved in? Will you be known for 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years or for an eternity for the thing you impressed upon people and what you did with your time, how you can influence them or contributed to their way of life? From what I can see, the impression life of our activities here on earth are ephemeral at best. They are not lasting. And sure, within the sphere of our influence, people who rise above and become the best at what they do are remembered longest by those peers, and those connected to a particular industry are remembered by those people. But outside of such, most people are not remembered for what they did and what they spent their time doing. There could be a single engineer who worked for GM and spent all of her life really contributing to the product line of GM. And the world at large probably doesn't know her. And in fact, the country she lives in probably doesn't know her. And maybe some of her neighbors know what she contributed. The people at GM will know her while she's alive. And then the historians of GM products will say, well, yeah, she was really influential in bringing forth Scotch tape or whatever it might be. It's interesting to watch interviews of aging rock stars and movie stars and business moguls and sports heroes. It doesn't take long for their value and their battery life to start to dim, almost into oblivion, really quickly. Only a handful out of billions of people leave a mark so long they continue to be heralded long after their death. Even shortly after the death. It's remarkable that 30 years ago, you could talk to almost anybody that you talked to and ask them if they knew Michael Jackson, and they would say yes. Today, a child 8 years old and younger would have no idea of who you're talking about, unless they were exposed to Michael Jackson and his music through somebody else. Where he was a household word for people under 8 then too. Today, many people don't know him. Of course, we're grateful and we stand on the shoulder of people who have laid the groundwork for the advances that we take. But in the end, looking back on our human life, whether long or short, what really matters? And I say it's the thing that lasts the longest. The thing that will make the longest impression. Charlie Watts of the Rolling Stones just died recently. Many don't even know who he is, but he was a drummer in one of the biggest rock bands in the world, the Rolling Stones. What matters to Charlie Watts now? I wonder, now that he's left this existence, what really matters to him? Is he reflecting on the good old days of being a drummer in the Rolling Stones? Or is he saying, gosh, I wish I would have paid more attention or spent more time doing this? Imagine how sobering the reality could be when we face eternities. That you are now facing a state in which you will never depart from at least from what we know from Scripture. And especially in light of the teachings of Jesus. Remember, he said, don't make your treasures on earth where moth and dust and mold and thieves break in to steal, but create treasures in heaven. Remember that? And, build houses on rock, not on sand. And the selfless love being paramount to a happy eternal existence. Will anyone in the presence of God and in the economies of heaven really give a rat's rear end in the long run of Hollywood stars or artists or writers or politicians or inventors? Especially if they were demanding, if they were selfish, if they were attitudinal, artists and stars and writers and politicians. Will anyone really care? I have to ask myself that question because it helps reprioritize what I'm about. Imagine the battery life, the impression life around those who freely choose in this life to walk by faith, to look to God and say, I trust you, my Creator, with what's happening, who say, I am going to, as commanded, love selflessly those around me, as Jesus said, with the two great commandments being love God and love neighbor as self. That's the stuff Scripture seems to say the eternities are made of. That's the stuff that has longevity and legs. It's the stuff that lasts. And it's that stuff that you might want to consider spending more time in. I mean, if you're going to invest in anything in this life, it seems like you want to make the primary investment, the primary focus of everything that you say and do and create and present and accomplish on the foundation of sacrificial, selfless love for God and for man, neighbor, others. The battery life, the impression life of that stuff, I suggest, is eternal. And it's a daily choice that we're making on whether to invest in it or not. To live for self or to live for Him. To do your will or to do His will. To turn the other cheek or to respond with revenge. To forgive or to bear a grudge. To act with long suffering or to be impatient. To be foolish or wise, to be led of the Spirit or led of the flesh. No matter what we accomplish here, as great as these things can be, and rewarding and fun and good for our ego, no matter how well these things are received, how impressive to the masses, or how rewarding they are to the flesh, if they aren't done in an environment of selfless love, I suggest that they'll fade forever in importance and significance. Jesus plainly taught this, and I echo His every sentiment. I especially want to reiterate this message of hope to all of you out there who are presently trodden underfoot by the wave of social media presentations. The glamorous bodies and lifestyles and faces and hair and clothes and makeup and vacations. All of the stuff that is fed to us through a medium that is not truly based in living, breathing, sweating, bleeding reality. I want to encourage you not to be overwhelmed by these presentations of bias and don't let this world bombard you daily and make you feel less accomplished, less valuable. I encourage you strongly to look to Him and live with true life that goes on into the eternities. I challenge you to ask yourself, by adopting or adapting to the lifestyles and attitudes that are presented to you, are you contributing to the ephemeral or are you contributing to the eternal? It's a great question to ask yourself. And while contributing to the eternal is tough because it doesn't pay dividends until after this life, I suggest it is the wisest thing someone who believes in an afterlife and believes in God and Christ can do. Hang on to Him, folks. Learn of Him. Grow in your knowledge of Him and the Father, especially our females out there, especially. Don't buy into the worldly lie. There is another world on high, a spiritual heavenly place that is good and waiting for you whose hearts are placed on it. Let those who live for today and invest in the flesh have their way. Love them along the way, but trust in Him who says there are rewards waiting for those who walk in faith and love. Remember, if you want to take advantage of the changes that are coming in this ministry next year, email us at Shawn@aletheamedia.com. Tell us your name and the state or country in which you live. We will include you in the change. I don't think you'll be disappointed. If you don't do it, we can't include you. And there is going to be a cutoff when we have to move forward. So write us, send us an email, Shawn@Aletheia tell us your name, and that will be confidential, and the state or country in which you live, which will also be confidential. Bye.